and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Before I start today's show, I want to say a big thank you to all of my new listeners. If you're just joining me for the first time, if you've been recommended, or if you're just starting to listen to a few shows now, please do me a favor, like, subscribe, do all of that type of stuff, the yada, yada, yada part. Rate me 5 stars, whether you follow me on Spotify or on Apple Music or the other places where you get your podcasts from. This helps me keep the show free for now and allows me to run this without ads. Now, I do have a donation link in my description of the show that allows people, I've had people ask me, if you want to donate to the show, it does take me a lot of time and work and effort to put into this. It allows me to bring you some really high quality content. So if you want to donate to the show, you can. You click the link below. Anything you donate, big or small, is always welcome. So let's get to today's show. Today, I want to kind of explore something many of us carry quietly. That's our sexual secrets, and more specifically, the shame that often surrounds them. Now, whether these are parts of ourselves we hide from maybe society or our partners, or even from ourselves, they can become a really heavy burden. Now, on a previous episode, I focused on the external pressures like digital intrusion, even blackmail, where our private lives can be exposed without our consent. But today, I really want to shift that focus to inward. What happens when we're the ones holding on to our own secrets, when we're weighed down by that shame? How can we work toward, freeing ourselves from that burden? This really is a sensitive and important conversation because there's a lot of us who are out in the community and there's a lot of us who aren't because we hold on to that fear of what everybody else might think. Now, for many of us that are in the community and beyond, all of these things are tied to judgment, rejection, or feeling like there's something, quote unquote, wrong with us for having these desires. But, in this space, I'm committed to really breaking down that barrier and talking openly and embracing the idea that we can live authentically and without shame. So why does this even matter? Because carrying these secrets and feeling the weight of that shame can hold us back from truly connecting with others, and more importantly, from connecting with ourselves. So today I really am going to try to explore why this happens and how we can start the process of even letting go. I'm going to kind of, I'm going to share a little bit of the insights of things that I've heard over the years, because I think it's kind of important to make this a lot more relatable for you all so you can understand where all of these things go. So first here, I think it's really important to start out by understanding the whole roots of sexual shame. Now, how do we understand what sexual shame is and where it comes from? Well, this is something that many of us experience now, whether it's tied to our identity, our desires, the kind of relationships we want to engage in. This shame roots in early childhood conditioning. Surprise, surprise, right? What we're taught about sex by our families, religious institutions, or even through our societal normality. A lot of us grew up hearing messages that certain desires were either wrong or sinful. And those ideals really do get internalized, and that shapes how we see ourselves really long into adulthood. Now, there's really incredible psychologists out there like Brené Brown talk about how shame is linked to our feelings of not being worthy or love or belonging. And it's that whole nagging fear that something is inherently flawed about us. And when it comes to sexuality, there's something deeply intimate and personal, and this fear of judgment can hit even harder. Now, for those of us in the BDSM community, that fear really of not being accepted is often heightened because our desires don't fit into the mainstream anyway. So we kind of end up on hiding those parts of ourselves because we know, or at least we get that feeling that we don't fit, right? But that leads to what I call this whole secret-keeping cycle. When we keep our sexual identities or desires hidden, we start creating layers of secrecy to shield ourselves from being judged by our family, our friends, sometimes even our partners, right? And we keep all of these things because if we create these layers of secrecy for, protection, we tell ourselves, hey, This is going to keep us safe. I don't have to worry about any of this ridicule. But the reality is, by adding all these bricks to a wall between us and the outside world, that's all we're doing. And all of these secrets, they create a distance. And it's not only from others, but from ourselves as well. And you're going to see when we hide parts of ourselves, we reinforce the very notion of shame we're trying to escape from. We start to believe that if we need to hide it, then we must be, I don't know, there must be something wrong with it. And the more we bury these aspects of our sexuality, the more shame grows. It really does become a cycle, and we get caught up in it. And when we keep the secret, the shame deepens the more isolated we feel. The fear of being found out or judged keeps us stuck in this loop over and over again. And over time, this can take a toll on our mental health. So the secrecy also prevents us from building genuine and authentic connections. And we may feel that if people know, I don't know, maybe the real us, the part that we keep hidden, they wouldn't really accept us. So we kind of hold back in our relationships. We're afraid to let people get too close because it's not just about hiding our desires. It's about protecting ourselves from the vulnerability of rejection. And the cost is that we never truly connect with others or even ourselves because we're always holding that part of ourselves back. And this is something that I see in therapy. I often see how this whole cycle of secrecy can cause internal conflict for people. We crave intimacy and we crave acceptance, yet we fear exposing our true selves for the ramifications that might happen. And this tension keeps us in a state of emotional isolation, and this feeds in this whole negative loop of shame, fear, and secrecy. Now, what's interesting about all of this is, over the years, as I've told colleagues or friends, family, I don't really believe in telling family, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't think they need to know about my sexual life or what I do for pleasure. That's not, some things are meant to be private. But, amongst friends, I'm not very concerned. Our sexuality is something that makes up a big portion of our lives. For the most part, we all like sex. We like different sexual activities. We all, for the most part, I really haven't found somebody that doesn't have a fetish. Guys who don't like women in, high heels or wearing stockings and a garter, or women who like men with beards and big chests or broad arms or whatever, right? We all have something that really drives us up the wall. Or maybe we really sit at home and we're just masturbating in front of a mirror because we really like it and we feel this spiritual connection to ourselves, and we are discovering through our own identity what we like and what we don't like, what we look like and how it feels and how exciting it is. And all of those neurochemicals are rushing in, right? But even recently, even in a place like FetLife or Fetish.com or other places of social media where BDSM is, talked about quite, openly, I have been shamed for the whole, you're a therapist, you like BDSM, what's wrong with you? You're literally on a fetish website asking me that question. There's nothing wrong with me. As a matter of fact, why are you even asking that question in the first place? They're literally trying to shame me because of what? Why? Because I have a profession? I can be equally good at my job and equally love this lifestyle. As a matter of fact, I've been a part of this lifestyle for over 26 years. I don't hide that. That allows me to connect to people. Over the last 2 days, I've had quite a few new clients come in who are really quite new to the lifestyle. So having someone that when they're working for whatever issues that they're going through, and I'm not going to go into those details, but I can explain certain facets of the lifestyle and help them kind of navigate a couple of spaces, it makes them feel at ease. They don't feel like they're being judged. But again, I don't have shame. I don't have shame because I partake in this lifestyle. I love it. I've loved it since the moment I walked into a Dom convention in Atlanta, Georgia, back in the 90s. Late 90s, as far back as that goes. And, so I tend not to let people shame me. But, as we've moved in such a, I don't want to turn this into politics, but I am going to say this part so I can move before I move on. But because we've become such a politically charged society, the things that we do like, regardless of who's participating in, I don't know, two consenting adults, people are shaming the things that they like to do. And this is the whole reason about sexuality and shame. We want to, I'm not talking about maybe having sex in public and doing something illegal, but if you want to sit in your backyard in a tent covered in peanut butter getting a blowjob while you sing Yankee Doodle Dandy, and I'm sure some of you are going to start laughing at that, why not? If that gets you off and it gets your partner off, great. Connect. That's what it's all about. If your partner wants you to go down on her while she's eating a carrot and she has to complete a crossword puzzle before she orgasms, why not? Why not? Why aren't we exploring? Why aren't we living out some fantasies? Obviously, we don't, I'm not talking about being exposed to neighbors and doing all that stuff, non-consenting. Of course, do it in lower your risk profile, but I'm not here about that. I'm just talking about living out our fantasies, right? You want to go hike up in the woods and have sex on the top of a mountain, while you're wearing a butt plug, or maybe you're getting pegged by your girlfriend. I don't know. Why are we scared to talk about these things? I had a conversation, earlier this year with a wonderful couple, and this gentleman opened up about that whole experience. My God, no shame, no pride. And you know what? Good on him for it. He's living life. So why do we sit back and hold life? Why are we scared from that whole judgment of others? I'm not talking about going to your boss and telling him you just came out of the bathroom because you just got done, cranking one out. You don't need to be that open. There are appropriate places to have conversations. But, for the most part, we can learn to be a little bit more sexually liberated. If we want our sex lives to be a little bit more accepted, maybe part of it is not then all of us walking around being shameful. And I'm also, let me clarify that too, there are some of these events that go on around the country or around the world where they do some of these actions in the middle of the street. I don't necessarily agree that those are overly appropriate, because if they're in the eyes of people who can't consent to see that, I don't agree with that, but that's about it, right? There are places that we can do these things, that we can be liberated. You don't get the right to have, a heavy-duty impact scene, a rope scene in the middle of the I-5 in California, or on the 290 loop around Washington, D.C. And I'll tell you what, probably more politicians are freaky than the rest of us anyways, so I've heard stories. I worked in D.C. for a few years. Trust me, I've heard stories. But nevertheless, we hide all of this. So why? And what is that whole impact? What's the psychological weight here of all of these sexual secrets? Well, now that I've kind of touched base a little bit on the whole roots of sexual shame, and this whole perpetuating this cycle of keeping secrets, let's now talk about the impact on our health, both emotionally and even physically. Now, every time we hold on to these secrets, it doesn't just affect how we interact with others, it really does affect how we see and treat ourselves. And one of the major psychological impacts here of keeping these types of secrets is the way it tears us down, and especially over time. When you carry a secret, you're also carrying a lot of fear. Your fear of being exposed or compromised, of being rejected, or feeling judged. And it creates a constant sense of tension, like you're always looking over your shoulder, wondering if someone's going to find out and how they're going to react if you do. You know what? My parents are still alive. My website's not a secret. I've told them what I talk about. And they're like, hey, good on you. Now, that really wasn't a thing 50 years ago for them. Really wasn't. Maybe it's not something, who knows? But I'm not hiding it. I'm not ashamed of it. I love this community. It's why I do this show. It's why I write so much. And it's why I see a lot of people in the community. Right? We can't, on one sense, tell everybody, hey, yeah, be proud of who you are, and then condemn them for the things they like. I also didn't come, when I joined this community, which has long been around long before me, because anybody was going to tell me what I liked and couldn't like, If I wanted to shovel cattle pross up somebody's backside while they're gagged and, getting suction cupped on their back, that's more likely because I'm a sadist. The reality is you're not going to shame me into doing it's wrong. And that's a whole nother thing. I'm going to have to do one of these whole podcasts on kink shaming. We'll talk about that later. Kind of digressed a little bit. But really, we carry all this judgment, and it creates all of this tension for us. We're looking over our shoulders, and what ends up happening is over time that fear doesn't just stay in the background. It does turn into anxiety. It turns us into self-isolation and intense self-judgment. We start sitting in the mirror and going, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you, Chris? Why are you, why do you want to be spanked? Why do you want to hurt somebody? Why are you taking pleasure? What is mentally wrong with you? We beat ourselves up. And you find yourself all of a sudden you're hyper aware of others and how they're perceiving you, and you start avoiding deeper connections because you're afraid you're going to get too close and they're going to discover what you're hiding. And let me be the first to tell you yet again, there is nothing wrong for us and our sexual desires. It does completely keep us normal, right? This has been confirmed before. And what do I mean by that? I mean literally scientific journals that have studied the effects of the participants inside of the lifestyle versus those who are not. And it does, emphatically prove there's nothing wrong with us. Talked about that before. We're not going to spend too much time on that today. But ultimately, this whole fear that some of us do contain, it comes from a real sense of powerlessness. And when we feel that, we really don't live openly as our authentic selves. We lose control. And it's not just over how others see us, but really over how our own lives are conducted. And we end up suppressing parts of ourselves to maintain that whole certain image. I'm the good guy and I wear my suit and I'm helping people out, or, she's the smart girl that's just a scientist, and, all of those things. And that whole suppression can start to take over. It doesn't matter. I want to be smacked in the back, on the backside, or she wants to put cigarettes out on somebody's genitalia. Nope. We can't enjoy it, because we're suppressing it. We're doing that whole Vulcan thing of like Kolinar, where we suppress our emotions, right? But the reality is what we're doing is we're splitting ourselves in two. The whole public persona that we're showing to others and the hidden self that we're keeping in the shadows. And over time, that hidden self starts to feel smaller, weaker, and less worthy. I'm telling you today, you don't have to. Now, I'm not, I'm not telling you to go out and start like masturbating in your car in the front of a craft store or anything, because that's illegal, and don't do that, right? And we also talk about consent. But, if you've wanted your partner, you've never had your partner, go down on you or spank your butt or, drip wax on you, and that's something you want to do, go home and have that conversation. Why not? Who knows? They might be into it. You might find out that they secretly want a Pepto-Bismol enema. And you know what? Indulge. Go crazy. Go nuts. Spread that peanut butter all over the place. Whip out the mayonnaise. I don't know. I'm just throwing condiments out there. It's been a condiment day, so that's really got no relevance or anything. I'm not trying to offend you, people who like peanut butter and mayonnaise. Don't get all freaky and start sending me emails about that. Nothing to do with that. These are just examples, right? But the reality is that whole secrecy part that we're keeping to ourselves, it deeply affects our self-worth. And we're constantly hiding a part of who we are, especially when that part is really personal and intimate as our sexual identity. And we send a message to ourselves that this part of us is unworthy of being seen and we should never bring it out. And we start to believe that this part of us is inherently wrong, it's bad, there's something wrong with us, and it erodes our sense of self-worth over time. And it's like telling yourself, I'm not as enough as who I am. And that kind of self-judgment has a real lasting effect and impact. And the constant need to protect yourself from being seen also affects your confidence. You start to doubt whether you deserve acceptance or love, leading you to feelings of more isolation and disconnection. And when you're always hiding, it becomes difficult to trust others or even trust yourself. And, I've talked about this so much, but self-worth and trust are really key moments and points in healthy relationships, not just with somebody else, but with ourselves. If I feel like crap, if I don't think good of myself, do you think that other person is? If I don't trust myself, do you think the other person is? If we suppress these core parts of our identity, we reinforce this whole idea that there's something about us that's shameful. And it leads to this whole spiraling cycle of low self-esteem, anxiety, isolation. We go downwards and downwards. But breaking out of this cycle, it's about learning to embrace those hidden parts of ourselves and finding a way to live authentically. And before we get there, though, you got to recognize that just how much weight we're carrying when we live with these secrets. So learn to give yourself a break. There's nothing wrong. I told that to somebody today. What an amazing conversation. There's nothing wrong with you. You're normal. You want to be spanked or you enjoy the bruises. There's nothing wrong. Emotional masochism, physical masochism, there's nothing wrong. And this is a great segue into this whole desire to be free. And I've talked about this whole sexual secrets and the shames that weigh us down, but I really want to turn towards something that's a little bit more hopeful, the desire for freedom from those secrets. And what's that freedom look like? And what does it mean to be finally free from the whole burden of shame? Now, first, I want to be clear about something. Freedom doesn't necessarily mean making a public declaration or revealing your whole sexual identity to everyone around you. It's not about needing the world to know. It's about finding that whole internal freedom and by accepting and embracing who you are without judgment. Now, this is an internal process. It's about you deciding to let go of that shame that you've been carrying and recognizing that your desires, your identity, your experiences you've had, all of this stuff is valid. And it's about giving yourself permission to be who you are, even if no one else knows about it. And whether you all people know who this is or not, Carl Rogers, and he's a renowned psychologist, said something incredibly powerful, and I think it really does apply here. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself for just as I am, then I can change. Now, that's going to sound contradictory at first, but it's really true. The more we fight against who we are, the more we feel. The more stuck we feel. Right? But when we embrace those parts of ourselves, especially the parts we keep hidden, we unlock the ability to grow and evolve. Self-acceptance is the antidote to shame. When we accept our sexual identity, our desires, our fantasies, our erotic, wants, all of that, all these parts of ourselves that we've hidden, we begin to break free from that whole cycle of secrecy and shame. But this whole journey towards freedom and vulnerability, it requires a lot of internal fortitude. And sometimes you're going to have to take things on the chin because people aren't going to understand. They might call you crazy. They might say you're weird. That's fine. Let them be repressed. We don't need to go back to being those people, right? I'm very comfortable when I'm out in public and I'm with one of my colleagues. Now I'm very cognizant. I kind of keep my conversations down to like a 3 when I'm close, but I'm very confident to have sexualized conversations. I'm not talking about the actual acts of sex, but talking about things that are in a sexual nature, because I don't have shame, but everybody's like, shh, don't let them hear you. Why? One thing I notice when I'm having these conversations, people are actually leaning in. They're curious. They want to know. Why? Because guess what? The very people that I'm talking about today are also those people. But we're not allowed to talk about all that stuff. Now, vulnerability often gets this whole bad rap. It's like, especially in men, it's seen as a weakness. Don't cry, you big baby. But in reality, there's a whole lot of power in being vulnerable. Now, whether you're opening up to somebody or the community or just being honest with yourself for the first time, it's what breaks this whole cycle of shame. And being open about who you are and what you want without fear or judgment gives you control back. And it allows you to take ownership of your story rather than letting shame define it. And that kind of sounds really cool to me. Vulnerability doesn't have to be public either. Sometimes it just starts with a conversation you have in the mirror with yourself, acknowledging all the parts of you that you've kept locked away. Maybe it's just sharing that whole truth with one person you trust, a friend or therapist or even a partner. That act of opening up, even in the smallest ways, really can begin to lift this whole weight of shame. Now, inside of our community, we often talk about how consent and communication are essential, but they're just not tools for negotiating scenes. They are actually ways of empowering ourselves. When you engage in open communication about your desires and your wants and your fantasies, you're actively rejecting shame. You know what you're saying? This is who I am. I'm not going to hide it. I want you to spank my ass with a wet paper towel while I sing Britney Spears, Toxic, with a candle in my mouth or something. I don't know how you're going to sing with a candle in your mouth, but you get what I'm saying, don't you? I know you all are, and I'm sure a few of you are giggling at that because you're imagining that type of scenario, right? BDSM encourages this vulnerability and allows us to express our desires in a way that feels safe and accepted. Even if some of that dynamic is shifting and people are trying to kink shame, for the most part, that's what it does. And that process, we often find that whole freedom we're looking for. The freedom to be ourselves without fear. That freedom on a Friday night to go to the dungeon dressed up in leather and latex with a 6-inch anal plug inside of you and your nuts clamped in a chastity device. Hey, you know what? If that's you, empowered, be yourself, right? Or maybe you're doing the 30-day chastity thing and you're getting, your device put on. That's great. Freedom isn't just about grand gestures. It's about small, intentional steps towards acceptance. It's about reclaiming our personal power through being vulnerable, who we are, and no longer allowing shame to dictate our lives. It's brave. It's freeing. And you know what? It is possible. I know there's going to be some naysayers out there. There's always naysayers out there. Chris, you're wrong. You know what you're talking about. You're right. I don't spend all those years in school and all those conferences I go to and listening to all these other experts out on the planet and coming to my own conclusions and all that stuff I read. But you know what? All of you Dr. Google people got me blown away. I'm not wrong. It's just hard because we're scared. We're always wondering what happens when we break free. That's what we're caught in. You know what's going to happen when you break free? Absolutely nothing. The world's going to keep on spinning. And then you end up feeling really good about it, right? You're always worried about doing that first scene. And then you go and do that first scene. You're like, oh man, wasn't as bad as I thought. Can't wait to have more. Absolutely. You're free. And this is the final segue here, that this whole steps towards freedom from shame. This is the part I want to talk about, these tangible steps that we can do towards this whole liberation from sexual shame. Because freedom isn't just an abstract idea. It's about something you can actively work towards every day. Now, first is the big one. We're going to talk about self-reflection. Now, if we begin looking inward, you take some time to reflect on your feelings, of where they originate, why the shame is there. Was it a societal message, a family belief, perhaps maybe a past experience that planted those seeds of shame? If you can understand the roots of the shame, you can diminish its power over you. It's like shining a light into a really dark corner so you can see actually what's there. And in doing so, you realize it's not as scary as you thought it was, right? And from there, you can start journaling. And this can be a really helpful tool because you're writing down your thoughts and your feelings, and you can gain clarity and insight into what you're carrying. And let me tell you, that's really important. Number 2, self-compassion. And as we reflect, you got to remember to practice a little bit of this, because you got to be kind to yourself. It's important to recognize that this whole desires, of whatever they may be, they're not about something to be ashamed of. Shame doesn't define your worth. You're worthy of love and acceptance and to be freaky and kinky as much as you want to be. And if you try speaking with yourself as you would maybe a dear friend, you could say to them, what would you say to them? Especially if they were struggling with something similar. Would you be compassionate and listening, or would you shame them? And you've also got to learn to build trust, and that trust starts with yourself. And then eventually with others through small acts of vulnerability. This doesn't have to be some sort of monumental revelation here, especially right away. It could be, something simple like expressing a desire to a partner, or writing in a journal about what you crave that's free from judgment. Maybe you want to talk to them and, you're saying, hey, one time let's just have sex in the laundry room, right? I want to be flogged in the shower. I'd like to try that with you. All of these small little steps that you're doing, this creates this whole space where you can explore these desires and fantasies. And as you share these thoughts, you're likely to find that you're probably not alone. That your partner might have some sort of similar feelings or experiences that they want to share and that you want to embrace. And I often get questioned well, Chris, how do I do this? How do I do this? Well, this is the next part, boundaries. And you have to understand that being open about your whole sexual secrets doesn't mean you have to overshare with everyone in your life. Instead, you really got to focus on finding people where trust and safety already exist. And then set boundaries around who you feel comfortable sharing your secrets with. Could be a supportive friend, maybe someone like myself, like a therapist, or even your trusted online community. I mean, that's putting it out there. Once you put stuff online, I mean, it's out there. So maybe start with somebody closer to home. But have that space to express yourself so you can make the world of yours a little bit different. It can expand your journey. But boundaries don't just exist for other people, they do exist for ourselves. Now, this last one I kind of put in there, and I have one. And for some people, for others, it's a little tougher, but maybe start, over time looking for a community, right? Because you don't want to underestimate the importance of one. You can connect with others, even maybe online in a similar state or county. And this can be really incredibly liberating here because it allows you to share similar experiences with others. And you get a chance to feel seen and accepted and being a part of something where you're not judged in an environment where you live. And you can explore these desires openly. And this really becomes a huge, powerful catalyst for change because it reinforces the idea that you're not alone and that many people navigate all of these other similar paths just like you. All of this is hugely important. So here's some final thoughts on all of this. Shame is a heavy burden, but the beautiful truth is that we don't have to carry it forever. It's a weight that can be lifted, and that whole journey towards liberation is one worth taking. Because we have one life to live. And we want to live it to be full and have experiences that make us happy and feel fulfilled. We want to kind of be free from the whole metaphorical shackles of secrets that hold us back from being our one true selves. I said metaphorical because I know there's a lot of you, there's many of us out there that like using shackles. I digress. But if we embrace that whole vulnerable side of ourselves, we practice a little bit self-compassion, and we use these powerful tools to break this whole cycle of shame, through all of that, we begin to see ourselves not as flawed, but as whole individuals deserving the most out of life. And here's one thing. I invite all of you to take one small step forward towards freeing yourself from shame. It might be as simple as just reflecting on your own feelings of shame or having an open conversation with a trusted friend or even acknowledging your desires without judgment. Each small action here can lead to a profound shift on how you see yourself and your own worth. I hope this conversation was impactful for you today, because all of this makes up not only part of our physical sense of who we are, but our emotional and our, mental sense of self. A lot of S's going on there. But if you're struggling with this and you need someone to talk to, reach out. I've got in the show's description as well. I'll put it in there. There's my therapy website. You can reach out to me, talk to me if you need to schedule something, right? You can find me. You can email me if you need to talk. If you have another idea for the show, something I haven't covered, please reach out to me, the Kink Perspective altogether at gmail.com. I do have a future episode. I've been spending the last few months talking to people in different parts of the Middle East. It's been a wonderful conversation from Saudi Arabia to Egypt to Jordan, Israel, even Lebanon, Turkey. I know it's not really too Middle East, but the reality is what does BDSM look like in that part of the world? It's going to be really a big conversation that I'm going to get to drop here soon. I know people have been also requesting notes, but there's going to be some changes on that. I'll get to all of that. But look, I really do hope you enjoyed today's conversation. I'd like to hear your thoughts. When did you ever carry shame in your life, or when was your moment, maybe your final liberation? What got you through? What broke that chain for you? Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.